Our next speaker, I am so thrilled to introduce you to. She flew on a red-eye overnight to be here with all of you. So that alone is just, she is a road warrior for the cause. This young woman works for townhall.com, and not only is she an incredible writer and reporter, but she is the one reporter who has looked at the Fast and Furious case and relentless, would not back down. That when the establishment media, maybe covered the story for a day or two and tried to downplay just how egregious these crimes were, Katie Pavlich was one of the only people who continually followed the case, and she continued to collect information and to get that story for you that nobody else would. She also wrote a book, Fast and Furious, which I'm sure she'll talk to you a little bit about today. I read through that book in 2 nights, and let me tell you, it changed my whole perspective on the entire case. I'm going to let her speak for herself and tell you her story, but please welcome Katie Pavlich.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm happy to be in Florida where it's sunny and warm after a long gray winter in DC, which actually wasn't that bad, but I'm originally from Arizona, so I like the sun. We're gonna get started here. I did make a little presentation for you guys, but yesterday I was actually at the Reagan Ranch Center in Santa Barbara, which was an amazing experience. And then I had the privilege of going to the actual Reagan Ranch, which is up on the mountains in Santa Barbara as well. So happy to be there, and I'm so happy that I was able to catch a flight overnight and be here today with all of you, because your dedication means that the rest of us need to be dedicated too. So as she talked about, I've been covering the Fast and Furious scandal, which I'm sure, hopefully, has everyone in this room heard of the scandal? Yes? Okay. Just so I don't have to, inform anyone, because I do run into a lot of people who don't. That's kind of been my main beat for about a year and a half now. And I cover a lot of different stories. I have to balance out my time in focusing on one story while focusing on many others as well. At Town Hall, we're a very small team, and so we kind of all have to cover all the different bases and the news that's going on in DC. But today I'm going to talk to you about how you can influence and push a story without the so-called mainstream media. Fast and Furious is a case where the mainstream, I like to call them complicit media, was willing to be involved in the cover-up alongside the government and not hold Eric Holder or President Obama or Janet Napolitano or the slew of characters responsible for a program that led to not a waste of taxpayer dollars, but hundreds of dead people in Mexico and 2 of our own federal agents. So with that, let's get started. A little background, I just did that. Let's talk about how Fast and Furious actually came about as a story. Fast and Furious didn't break through the mainstream media. It actually broke on a whistleblower website in kind of a chat room format on cleanupatf.org, and that was started by a ATF whistleblower named Vince Sheffield, and he created this forum for ATF agents to come forward anonymously to talk about the corruption within the agency, because ATF is known for retaliation, and so he wanted to be able to get the truth out without agents feeling like they were going to lose their job or have to be transferred and deal with family issues as a result. And so after that, the 2 bloggers, Mike Vanderboe and David Codrea, started catching up on these blogs, and they were spending a lot of time in these chat rooms, and they discovered that ATF had indeed, and DOJ had indeed, been walking guns across the border into Mexico. And so they both started writing about it. And that's when a CBS reporter, Cheryl Atkinson, launched her first big story on this on CBS News. And she's done a lot of great work, but she hasn't covered it like these guys. She hasn't covered it like a couple other reporters online have. And the great thing about online is that you can cover every twist and turn. It's not like a news package that has to be 3 minutes and it's only going on the evening news at this time slot, and you can only get so much information in there. The great thing about scandals and big stories like this and stories of corruption is if you have a development in a story, it's easy to write a blog post about it and put it up, and then you can link back to information that you had already produced. So, in terms of what you guys are doing, if you have a topic that you think is really important that's not getting enough coverage, how do you really get that into the mainstream or into the homes of people who might not be paying as much attention? Well, first of all, find something important. Find something that has a lot of meat to it, something that people aren't looking into, something that has more details that haven't been exposed. Find something you're passionate about. It's really not that easy to follow a story, turn in, turn out if you're not passionate about the story. And then make one story and topic kind of your baby and make it your priority. I already talked about kind of balancing out the different kinds of stories that you write. I have to do that on a daily basis. But if you make one story kind of your specialty, that's what will really get you to kind of the level where people come to you for information and therefore they tell other people about it, and that way your story gets out there. Consistency. The key to getting attention for a story is to continually and obsessively bring it up. I know that throughout the past year, some people would say to me, "Why are you so obsessed with this? Why do you continue to bring this up every chance you get?" And they try and tear you down for it. And you have to just say it's too important not to let go. And the key is consistency, 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 because in a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week news cycle, it's really easy to get lost in a headline. And this is why I actually wrote the book, because it's easy to see a headline on Fast and Furious and then forget about it the next day, when it's really important to keep it in the news. So consistently putting out content, like I said, covering a story at every twist and turn, linking back to important facts. So every story has their basic summary of what happened. So you're going to want to link back to that, maybe bring it up if it's a print article in a magazine or a newspaper, and kind of just re-educate people, maybe if they're not so familiar with the story, about really what's going on. Provide compelling evidence, something that people can't forget. Documents are always great. Stuff that you get through a FOIA is people love looking at that stuff. It's especially easy to put online because you can just upload it like a photo, and people can really see where the information is coming from. Photos as well, visually, a lot of different people learn different ways, but visually it's easy for people to remember a picture. And also present different aspects and angles to the twists and turns of the story. Don't continually repeat everything. It's important to go back to what I said, the basic summary of what the story is, but don't forget to present different angles every single time that you report on the same topic. Promote a human element. This is something that the left does really well. They'll have someone on TV crying about how Mitt Romney fired them. And you can hit back with all the facts that you want, but it's not going to matter unless you have someone on our side crying about how Barack Obama ruined their life with his economy. And so you have to break it down to how does this affect the everyday person? Especially at the federal level, it's easy to get lost in trillions of dollars in debt, just big numbers, big departments, everything else. It's really important to break it down to how does this affect me? How does this affect my neighbor? And really find out the different angles and different kinds of ways that it affects your readers and people who are going to be spreading around your message. Use different kinds of media to tell your story. If the mainstream is ignoring you, you have to use every tool in your toolbox, which means print media, photos, documents, interviews, get on local radio, try to do some TV, local TV, online, and video. The great thing about video is that a lot of the time, YouTube videos, if they're successful, actually get more views than a lot of television shows nowadays. And so you can actually have a greater impact online by making videos, and if different websites pick it up and embed it, you're getting watched more than maybe you would on a regular TV show. Use social media like it's your job. I know that 10, 15 years ago, social media seemed like a very scary thing because it was like strangers being able to look into your life. But use Twitter and Facebook as much as you possibly can. Every time you write a story about a topic you've been covering, send it out on social media. And now Facebook has their share, I know Tabitha's going to talk about this later, but they have their share status option. So if you post a link, it makes it really easy for it to float around Facebook. I know that Town Hall gets a lot of traffic off of our links on Facebook, so it's very effective. Come up with your own hashtags on Twitter that the mainstream isn't using. So, for example, everyone was using Fast and Furious as their hashtag on Twitter to describe the scandal. Well, I changed it to Murdergate, and that actually caught on, and it's a factual statement. And so when you kind of change the rhetoric a little bit, it makes people think about, well, they're not seeing it, getting bored with the same old rhetoric. You present something new and they want to learn more about the story. And then come up with catchy headlines. That's kind of a basic journalism 101. Don't name every single headline the same thing, and don't be afraid to step out of the, real journalist headline writing box. Don't be scared to use, fancy words, but don't be boring is basically what I'm trying to say. You don't have to fit into that category. And then word of mouth, talk about it. The best thing that you can do is tell a neighbor or tell someone at Jiffy Lube when you're getting your oil changed about a story. If they ask you, what do, you can say, oh, well, I've been working on the story. And then they'll ask you, well, what are you working on? And then you can tell them, and if you're just sitting there and you present it in a compelling way, then they're going to go out and go home and Google it and see what it's all about. And if they think it's compelling, they're going to tell someone else. And it's kind of just this domino effect of information that people are going to get. Take advantage of interacting with big media, especially if they're ignoring you. You can do this through debates. I know that during the GOP primary, they were ignoring the topic of Fast and Furious altogether, but a bunch of us got on Twitter and continually told them, you need to talk about this, and they finally brought it up, only once, but at least they brought it up, and they credited Twitter with it. So if you can take advantage of opportunities to interact with them and say, why aren't you covering this? This is important. And a lot of the time, the hosts of the big shows want you to contact them through those mediums, so you should take advantage of that. Chat rooms, every major media outlet has a chat room on their website. Tell everyone to email them, email the shows, email the producers, and also try and get on local radio. One of the most effective things that I actually did in college was I would go onto a local radio show every week for an hour and talk about what my professors were saying in my classes. And so that was a way for me to hold the university accountable at a local level in the town where the university was. And the hosts are always looking for guests, always looking for something new. And so if they can bring you in and you have a different story to offer every week or a different angle, that's exciting for both the hosts and the listeners. And then hold big media accountable. Question why they're holding out on an important story. Ask them why they're willing to cover up whatever is going on, whether it's corruption with federal money, local tax dollars, or whether it's covering up a program that has resulted in the deaths of hundreds of people. I mean, ask them what their deal is and accuse them of covering it up, because if they're not doing anything about it, they're sitting by and not doing their job. Promote the work of others, promote stories from other writers on the topic. When there's very few of you focusing on a topic that's really important, it's really important to band together and kind of organize, kind of like the left does, because when you're spread so thin, you have to work together to make sure you're covering all of the angles. And some of us who have been reporting on Fast and Furious have done a good job of balancing out the kinds of stuff that we write about. And then, of course, really promote media watchdog articles. Mary Chastain over at Big Journalism at Breitbart.com has been amazing. She has been calling out the media on this since the beginning, and it's really had a huge effect, because every time they don't run an op-ed, or every time they run an op-ed that's similar to Mexico or similar to gun trafficking, she'll email them and say, why aren't you covering this? And a lot of the time they'll actually write her back. And so when they feel the pressure that they're not doing their job, at least they start to pay attention, even if they don't do exactly what you want. Tagging a story, this is kind of more technical. This is for SEO, Google purposes. When you're tagging a story or doing something online, throw in the entire kitchen sink. What I mean by that is use words related to the story that might not actually be in the story. So if you're talking about Fast and Furious, but the story doesn't involve Eric Holder directly, you would still put his name in there. And so you would want to put all the topics that surround the story, even if it's not directly related, so that way if someone Googles something that's similar, your story will also come up and they can get more information about a certain topic. And then, of course, reference stories within other stories. Talked about that earlier, linking back to stuff you've already covered. And finally, don't let the news of the day dictate what you write about. Run your own race and do what you think is important. I think a lot of the time, and especially in radio and everyday news anyway, but we get kind of in the cycle of allowing the mainstream to dictate what we cover, how we cover it, and kind of just repeat what they've been doing. And they'll say, well, this is newsworthy and that's why we're covering it. And you look at, Mary Ellen brought it up earlier, you look at what they're covering and it's actually not newsworthy. I mean, is Michael Jackson passing away worth 2 days of coverage over what's going on in Iran? No. So don't let them dictate what they're doing. And then lastly, I would say what Mary Ellen brought up is the importance of banding together and making sure you have an army behind you, because there are going to be situations where you're being intimidated, especially if your story gains a lot of traction. Media Matters will be working with the White House and the Justice Department to try and destroy you. And so it's really important for you to let them know that, hey, there's just as many of us as there are of you, and if you want a war, we'll give you one. And so I would say, like she said, talk to each other, meet with each other, don't be afraid to back each other up, and have fun doing it. It's a lot of fun, make some friends. So do you have any questions? That's about it. Right there.
Yeah, it's like there's the body of your story. Do you write hyperlinks back to your whole stories, or how do you reference that people you involved into your
Right, so what I'll do is, if I'm talking about Fast and Furious, that's been my thing, but you can do this with any story. If I'm talking about a story and I'm doing a follow-up to a previous story and I say the words Operation Fast and Furious, I don't explain exactly what that is, but I do link back to one of my stories I wrote a year ago about what it was. And so if you mention someone's name, if you mention a player in the scandal, if you mention a situation and you've written stories about that before, just hyperlink it. You can never hyperlink too much. I mean, if you have a story and there's names that people may not know about yet, but you don't have the time or it doesn't quite fit, you can always link back, and that's the beauty of the web, is you can always put your old stories into your new ones. So, yes.
Hang on one second, I've got a mic for you.
Oh, okay. I have a loud enough voice, I think. Good morning. Thank you for what you do. On Bill Bennett, his morning show, Good Morning in America,
Yes.
The last week or so, were you on that program? There was someone who had
was,
written
yes.
a book. Was that you?
Yes.
Okay, great. You'd have to tell us the name of the book.
The book is called Fast and Furious, Barack Obama's Bloodiest Scandal and Its Shameless Cover-Up. That is the name. Don't be afraid of headlines. Yes.
Yes, I've written several articles for newspapers, and I find that, I find that I send them in, and like the Orlando Sentinel, they're kind of to the left, and they don't, but yet my local paper in Leesburg, the Daily Commercial, they tend to print some of what I write.
Right.
And I think I have found that you gotta kind of tiptoe in with your articles and stuff like that till you get your foot in the door, and then down through the body of what you're writing, then you can start getting more emphatic on what you're trying to get across. And it seems like that's better acceptable. Do you agree with that or not?
I agree and I disagree. I agree because, yes, you're trying to get in with the liberal editorial team. But at the same time, if you don't get to what your main point is in your lead, then people will stop reading. And so I'd say it's a delicate balance. I would say write your things when you're trying to get your foot in the door, write things that are a little less inflammatory or controversial, as they would say. And then later on, once you're in, I guess, be bolder. But I would say that they're probably going to shut you out no matter what, whether you tiptoe in or whether you come in full speed. So my style is more to come in full speed. Do you have a blog at all?
No, you got to remember, some of you're talking. I don't know whether number one, it's great to see young people involved in
Oh. Well, I only asked because.
Number two, a lot of us older people are not savvy.
Right, but it's an easy thing to learn, and I think the Franklin Center actually has workshops.
Later today, Tabitha Hale, this is a little promo, she will be giving a new media lecture, so she might be able to talk to you about blogging and Twitter and Facebook and things like that.
And
Us older folk hunger for it.
that's not an excuse, you can do it. You can do it, I promise. And the good thing is that, look, you don't need the editorial board anymore in this day and age. You don't need them. You can have your own site, your own work. You can spread it around the web and probably to more people than the newspaper business is circulating to anyway. So anything that they don't accept that isn't acceptable to them, you can put up on your own site and send to people. And then strangers on the internet will read it as well because it's just a link away. So I would encourage you to look into that. I know that it's important. It's the way to do it. So.
Thank you.
Yes.
See if everybody were to get this Cincinnati handbook on page 22 and 23, so specifics, creating why. The other thing I'd like to ask is this. Why shouldn't we rely upon our government officials that are conservatives and expect them, since we have paid to get them elected, we support and work for them, especially in this critical area, the stronger they want our support. I think we should demand, as groups go to their county meetings and things like that, and say, here, we want you to bring up these issues and tie them to them, because the media has to report our local, county, and state officials. If they're silent about things like this, for example, the death of law enforcement, like Zapata and Terry, the bottom line is they are helping the thing. They cannot be silent. They have to. We're paying them to go in and do these things, and they're the big known names and voices.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that they should be held responsible for holding others responsible.
And lastly, when you say about tagging a story, could you explain what you mean by that?
So in the online world, there are certain keywords that you can put in, and Tabitha, I'm sure, will also explain this later, into what would be your blog. And those keywords are what show up when people search on Google. So if you type in Fast and Furious, if someone types that in on Google, your article will come up in some way or fashion. So it's just a matter of putting words into your blog tagging system so that search engines, Yahoo, Google, pick up your story when people are searching for information on that topic.
Thank you for your work. Did you experience any suppression or intimidation in the course of doing your work? Maybe you could talk about that.
I think suppression is probably the best thing, and just non-transparency. The Justice Department makes it a key thing to throw up walls as soon as any reporters call. They have interns answer the phone. As soon as you give them their name, they actually literally hang up on you. And so, but you know, the best thing about them acting that way is that's also a story. I mean, just because you don't get the story that you went for in the first place doesn't mean it's a story. So if the Justice Department sends you back 100 pages of redacted material from a FOIA, you can say, most transparent administration ever sends back 100 pages of redacted material after FOIA request, Freedom of Information request. And so there's been a little bit, not much. I know, and I brought up earlier, the Justice Department and the White House working with Media Matters. They are. The Daily Caller did a big expose a couple weeks ago about how the White House was having weekly meetings with Media Matters. And then a couple weeks back, also, a reporter from the Free Beacon contacted the Justice Department about a particular subject in my book. And instead of giving them a response, they wrote back from an official DOJ email address that you all pay for. You're going to have to refer your question to the FBI, but in the meantime, I've been instructed to send you this link. And the link was to a full-on Media Matters hit job on the book and didn't even address the specific question that the reporter had. And so the DOJ is now allowing things like, outlets like Media Matters to be their mouthpiece. And you can see, and what's funny is that if you look at the talking points that Media Matters had for their defense against the book, they were the exact same talking points that Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer and all the people involved in Fast and Furious have been using in front of Congress. So they're working together, which is, like I said, why it's important for all of you to work together as well.
What's your next big story?
I don't know. We'll see. I'm focused on the election. Going to continue following the story because it's not over. We still have, we've got a lot of movement. Yesterday, Speaker Boehner, Majority Leader Eric Cantor, and the Majority Whip came out and said that they want accountability for this. So we really got the ball rolling on that. It's a good feeling to know that we've actually made a difference coming from, and when the media has ignored it at the level that they have, it's a really amazing feeling to know that people are actually moving forward with calling for accountability. So covering that, and then I think, as all of you probably know, voter fraud is going to be a huge issue this year. that's going to be something I'm focused on as well. So we'll see what the day brings.
Got a question right here.
Quick question. Hi, Katie. Can you give us a quick update on where exactly the Fast and Furious case is?
Yes.
Are the House Republicans, in fact, going to hold Eric Holder in contempt?
Okay, so the way this works is Chairman Issa is the chairman of the House Oversight Committee. So the House Oversight Committee wrote up and drew up this contempt charge draft, which is 64 pages long. In order for that to pass, the Oversight Committee has to take a vote, majority vote. It goes to the floor, just like any other piece of legislation. Speaker Boehner would bring it to the floor. His support yesterday guarantees that they would bring it to the floor for a vote. They would vote on it, majority. If it passes, it then goes to Speaker Boehner, who is then responsible for taking it to the U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C., who then looks at the case and decides if he wants to press criminal charges. Now, here's the problem. He works for Eric Holder, is also a Democrat. They have a long-term relationship. He's in line to be a federal judge kind of thing, doesn't want any black marks on his record. So it's probably not going to work that way. But what that means is they can then come back and the House can vote to launch a civil lawsuit against Eric Holder and hold him in contempt. So there are still options on the table, and I think that they are going to move forward because the Justice Department has put themselves in this place where the reason they're being held, Holder's being held in contempt possibly is because he ignored a subpoena that was issued in October. And if any of you did that, you'd be in jail. And so what they're going to, they're moving forward with is the Justice Department's put themselves in the situation where Eric Holder's changed his testimony multiple times under oath in front of Congress. They're not willing to tell us anything about the information and the 74,000 documents they haven't given us that have been requested because they're engaged in a cover-up. But now they've been given the option, you can come forward, give us these documents, and we won't pursue contempt charges, but then that brings in the question of perjury charges, considering there's probably information in these documents that are very damning to Eric Holder. And so they put themselves in this really bad spot where they're going to be embarrassed politically if they don't come forward, but also they would be putting themselves in a very bad situation by actually being transparent with these documents since they've covered up every step of the way. Yes?
What about Kevin O'Reilly and the withheld witnesses? And I said, what about the reprisals against people that have lost their jobs? We'd like to know some of those things.
Kevin O'Reilly keep in mind, the White House says they knew nothing about this program. Kevin O'Reilly was a national security advisor at the White House in touch with the Phoenix ATF special agent in charge about Fast and Furious. They were longtime friends. As soon as he found out about that connection, he was shipped to Iraq, and the White House is refusing to allow him to testify in his own personal capacity or with a DOJ lawyer. And so, no one has been fired as a result of this. I mean, hundreds of people have been killed. And not one person has been fired. Right, and so, that's the whole goal here, is to get these people held accountable for their actions, and we're hoping that's what happens. Sir?
Yeah, is it true that is it true that nothing's really going to happen, that ICE's hands are tied until Boehner does something?
But Boehner's doing something. That's the thing. He came out yesterday in full support. They sent a letter directly to Eric Holder saying it's time to come clean.
Okay,
so,
thanks.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
I'm just curious, are there any Democrats who are actually trying to be bipartisan?
Yeah,
in
it's
this?
an interesting political situation because last year in June, right before Congressman Issa held his first hearings on this scandal, a group of 31 Democrats in the House sent a letter to Eric Holder asking for accountability. And so they are willing to do it then. They've been more silent now, but we have seen a little bit of some rumblings of them coming forward and saying, at the very least, we're not going to go with contempt charges, but we are going to go with you need to be giving us these documents. We were at an event a couple weeks ago, and Pat Caddell was there, and he's a Democrat, and he said, I can't believe people haven't been calling for Eric Holder's impeachment. He's lucky he's getting just contempt charges. And so I think that shows, the state of where we are in D.C. We're not willing to, kind of hold people accountable for their actions, but I think I really have to be positive and optimistic about where we are. If you think about it, Watergate took 3 years. We're into year 1 of this scandal. And so there's still some time left, and I have to have hope that we'll see some answers. Our system works. It does in the end, and I have faith that it will.
Right
In writing a story and interviewing anyone in either the media or the government, how do you respond to the talking point of an unprecedented release of documents?
From the DOJ. Them saying, we've been giving you so many documents. You just throw out the numbers, and you throw out the facts, and you say 80,000 documents are there. You've given the House Oversight Committee 7,000 of them, most of which have been so redacted they look like black paper. Now tell me if that's an unprecedented release of documents. And what's interesting about a document I actually have in my book is you look at what they're redacting. Upcoming expected policy and legislative developments, blacked out. I mean, why? That's something that the taxpayer absolutely should have access to, considering those policies affect you. But that's the kind of information that they're withholding. It's funny because they say, you know, Eric Holder has testified 7 times about this. Why aren't you satisfied? And it's because he's testified 7 times about this and given the same lies and non-answers to us. And so just because someone comes in front of Congress multiple times doesn't mean they're giving us any answers or moving the ball forward. So that's what I would say, just hit them back with the numbers. And anyone with common sense would see that as, okay, you know, they're clearly not releasing or being cooperative here.
Got a question. Hi, Katie. You talk about promoting a human element. How do you tie a national issue like this to a local level, making it so everyday Americans care about this issue when it doesn't affect their everyday lives?
Well, what you do is you take a situation. So in this situation, the reason this whole story blew up was because Border Patrol Agent Brian Terry was killed, murdered on American soil, right? This was a guy who was a police officer. This is a guy who was a Marine. So what you say is this Justice Department was willing to allow guns to go into Mexico, to only flow back north to go into our neighborhoods, to go into the neighborhoods where our police officers are trying to keep us safe. And guess who's going to face the end of those barrels? The moms with the police officers' sons and daughters, or Border Patrol, or just you find people in your community who have a connection to law enforcement in this specific case. And you say, look at how this would affect you. Clearly they don't have respect for law enforcement if they're going to send the very people they claim to be fighting and arm them with more weapons than local police officers even have. I mean, they were sending these guys AK-47s, 50 calibers. 50 calibers can take down a helicopter. I mean, this is major, major firepower. And so if you just connect it on that level of, if you have a son in the military or you have a son in law enforcement, it's something to point out and say, is the Justice Department really looking out for the law enforcement they claim to protect? Because clearly in this case, they weren't, and they still aren't, because we still don't have answers about what happened to that night and at that crime scene. So.
How about the Second Amendment? Everybody that believes the Second Amendment, the NRA people, this was started as the whole motivation. You're familiar with their policies on ammunition and guns prior to 2008, Biden and Obama, was to get rid of guns. So those 4 Southwest states were the whole basis, the whole inspiration, and now they're using it to limit people providing a gun and to get them registered on the list.
Right. Well, I don't have time to go through that whole thing now, but I do document that extensively in my book, and that was the goal behind it. And it's not just a claim. I love it when I go on TV and talk about how this was an attack on the Second Amendment, and they go, "Oh, you think it was?" After I've just cited emails, interviews with ATF whistleblowers, documentation, and they go, "Oh, so you think that's what it was?" And it's like, no, that's what it actually was, according to this email from July, blah blah blah. And so, I can't get into the details of that, but yes, absolutely, that's what it was all about.
So we have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions, and if you all would just wait till I come with the microphone, we are recording today's presentation, so we just want to make sure your great questions make the recording. So.
I have started a blog, but I'm not getting a lot of exposure. Does townhall.com have maybe a corner tucked away somewhere where people like me could throw a link on there, so at least we have a chance of someone stumbling upon us while we're writing?
We don't currently, because we don't have enough manpower to set that up yet. Like I said, we're a very small company in terms of just the town hall aspect. But I do know that there are websites that do that. I think redstate.com is one of them. You'll have to look into it, but I know that there are other sites, ours not in particular, but there are other sites that allow you to do that so you can get more traffic to your site. Yeah, and Twitter.
And Franklin Center is soon launching a website that will allow you to do so. We'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Question I have, do you remember approximately the date when the mainstream media ran their first story about Fast and Furious? You said it was CBS, right?
Yes, February 2000, the end of February, it's February 28th, 2011.
11, okay. I am a whistleblower, and PBS Frontline had done a story about my case, and I became just an acquaintance of one of their producers. And I lived in Phoenix at the time. And he had flown out to Phoenix from D.C. This would have been late 2010. And he had just been sent out there by Frontline to look into the story about a bunch of guns that had been sent down to Mexico that our government had sent down there. And he knew all about it. And I know that he found out about my story through an investigator at the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, because they both told me that. So I know he was getting his information from someone in the government. They never did a story on it. And he would never tell me why they didn't do a story on it. But I was just curious because I'm trying to play the timeline in my head. Frontline knew about this at least in the middle of 2010. And they had a producer down there investigating it in 2010. So 11 was when they did the first story, and it was CBS.
Yeah, and let me tell you another interesting aspect to that. In December 2010, December 15, 2010, very coincidentally, the same day that Brian Terry was killed, the Washington Post ran a huge story about the secret life of guns. And it was all about how Arizona gun dealers were fueling the cartel war by knowingly and knowingly and deliberately selling to these cartel members. Turns out the very same ATF managers and officials quoted in that story were the exact same guys behind Fast and Furious telling these gun dealers to sell. And so instead of coming clean when the Washington Post was, saying these guns are ending up in Mexico, ATF leaked trace data. ATF is the only agency in the country that has trace data. Leaked trace data to the Washington Post. The very same dealers that were getting traced were the ones, J&G Sales, Scottsdale Gun Club, Lone Wolf Trading Company, were the same dealers that ATF was telling and forcing to sell to these cartels. But did they come clean and say, this is an investigation we've been running guns into Mexico? No. They came out publicly and smeared them in the press, claimed that they wanted to be selling these cartels, that they were responsible for murder and mayhem in Mexico, and that they needed more regulation. That's what they were willing to do. The same exact officials who I watched testify in front of Congress were blaming these dealers, even though these dealers were told and lied to about this program. They were told the guns won't go to Mexico, lie, went to Mexico. No one would get hurt, lie, hundreds of people are dead. And that these straw purchasers who were buying guns and transferring them to cartels would be arrested. That was also a lie. So they were lying to these dealers the whole time, while at the same time, when these guns were ending up in Mexico, which was the plan, they were blaming the gun dealers and said we need more regulation. Smearing them publicly in the press, nationally, in public, government speeches. I mean, it was disgusting. And that's why, quickly, I know we have to go, but every big story has so many stories. I mean, Fast and Furious is a scandal with many scandals underneath it. And the reason I say that is because it's either the death of a Border Patrol agent, the cover-up from the Justice Department, the Attorney General, the highest guy in the country in terms of who's enforcing the law, changing his testimony multiple times under oath and not being held accountable for it. And then the government turning law-abiding gun dealers into criminals in order to push this unpopular anti-Second Amendment stance is really scary, and that's something that we need all of you in this room to hold them accountable for. So thank you very much for being here today.